What's going on, guys? Good Mike War Commentaries back at you with a little bit of a different video than what you're used to on Sundays. As most of you know, we are here every Sunday night to do classic pay-per-view watch-alongs together, but unfortunately, I have got some plans tonight, people coming over to the house, and I'm not going to be available for the watch-along, so I wanted to give you guys a replacement video instead. So this is going to be a very special episode. Remember back in the days watching sitcoms or whatever? Tune in this Sunday night for a very special Facts of Life or whatever. That's what today is going to be. It's going to be a very special episode because I thought it would be fun to give you guys a review on a pro wrestling TV episode that is extremely crucial and significant to me being a fan. It's my favorite episode of Saturday Night's Main Event of all time from October 3rd, 1987, the day the Mega Powers formed. I love this show and I have a lot of memories of it, and it was a very critical and crucial time in my life when I saw this, and I have very, very fond memories of this particular Saturday Night's Main Event. So we're going to break that one down here today in lieu of the classic watch-along. The reason I'm not here tonight for the classic watch-along is because it's my soon-to-be stepdaughter's 16th birthday today. She turned 16 Cinco de Mayo, and we're having a big party over here at the house for her sweet 16. She's going to go get her driver's license tomorrow. It's a big deal over here, so that's why I am unavailable today. If you would like to wish Auburn a happy birthday, you can do that right down below in the comments, and you can blame her for me not being with you guys today. But I thought it would be fun to give you guys a review instead. And I've been kind of wanting to talk about this show for a long time. I've been really shitty about keeping up with the members-only Saturday Night's Main Event watch-alongs. We've been doing those. I haven't done one in a couple of months. We will get back to them, and eventually we will get to this show. But I wanted to review this show because of how important it was to me at the time. I had just turned 10 years old. I was only like a month past my 10th birthday, where I had a party at my house. I received pro wrestling figures. I remember getting Macho Man Randy Savage and Paul Orndorff and maybe a couple of others on this birthday. And also what was so significant about this specific time in my life is it was right when I was moving to North Carolina from Michigan. I was living in Michigan all the way up until age 10. I was born just a couple of miles down the road from where WrestleMania 3 took place and lived there for the first 10 years of my life. And I moved down south to North Carolina, I think the second week in October. So this was one of the very last things I ever watched when I lived in Michigan as a kid. And I remember staying up late with my dad that night watching this. He was convinced I was going to fall asleep, so we popped a tape in the VCR and recorded the show, but I was able to stay up for all of it. And I kept this tape my whole life, all the way up until somewhere in my 30s, and it's now gone. And I always loved watching it as a kid. I wore this tape out so much because it was one of the only things that I still had recorded from Michigan. So I had all these Michigan commercials. There was like a Detroit Tigers song in there somewhere. And it was one of the last things I got to record on tape before I moved down south to a completely different type of life, moving from the suburbs in Michigan to a house that was brand new, that had just been built on an old tobacco farm. As a matter of fact, in my backyard, you still had like the lines in the dirt from like how they set up the crops and whatnot. And I went from, being in a suburbs of a metropolitan city, playing with friends, playing with action figures, and doing stuff mostly indoors, to moving down south where it's a lot of woods. Kids are into playing army and war and building forts and climbing trees. I had the best of both worlds as a kid. I stayed in my room and played with toys up until age 10. And then from 10 to, 12, 13 or whatever, I'm in the woods. I'm jumping on trampolines. I'm building forts. I'm playing sports. I'm doing all this stuff. So I had really kind of like two childhoods when I was a kid. And this particular Saturday Night's Main Event is what kept me a fan, because I was already super into wrestling when I was a kid living in Michigan, talking about it with kids at school. Even some of my neighbors, we would play with our wrestling figurines together. We would talk about wrestling, and wrestling was a very, very big deal to me from the time I started watching around 1982 or 1983 all the way up until 1987. But when I moved to North Carolina, it was a completely different ball game. Even though that is the South and the Carolinas, my immediate circle of friends and people I went to school with weren't super into wrestling, so I was kind of on my own. And I could have easily seen myself maybe losing interest in it because none of my other friends were in it. And I really credit this specific show with keeping me interested in wrestling because it's super significant. It really is when you look back. This is one of the more unique Saturday night's main events that they had ever done. And watching it as a kid, just, 6 months removed from WrestleMania 3 and all of those storylines, coming in here to this show with Macho Man Randy Savage now being a babyface, going back after the Intercontinental title that he lost at WrestleMania to Ricky the Dragon Steamboat, going after the Honky Tonk Man. And this is when him and Hulk Hogan first came together. And I have so many memories about this initial pairing of the Madness and the Mania that would start here in October, but would really not get going until WrestleMania 4, which would be 6 or 7 months later in 1988. When Savage won the title. A lot of fans look back at that as the beginning of the Mega Powers, but really it was months earlier on Saturday night's main event, and this show was huge to me as a kid. So I wanted to come up here and talk about this one. So hopefully this will give you guys sufficient enough video replacement for the watch along that we are missing tonight, because I think it's going to be fun to talk about this show, and I'm excited to share with you some of my memories. So that's what we're here to do. Like I said, this episode of Saturday Night's Main Event went down on October 3rd, 1987. I'm sure it was taped a couple of weeks before, but this is when it aired on NBC. The site of this show was the Hershey Park Arena, and it's one of the reasons why I recognize the Hershey Park Arena. Whenever WWE would go there, I would recognize that arena because of this show, because it's a very unique looking building. It's just an arena. I've never been there. If any of you have been to the Hershey Park Arena, please drop your experiences in the comments below, because I'd love to hear about this. I've only seen the building on TV, but WWE used to run Hershey all the time. And I remember kind of the blue vibe that it had. I think either the steps or the stairs in the arena were kind of like a blue or a teal or something like that. And I believe the stands were pretty steep because they had guardrails in front of the seats. And WWE would run this show, or run this building, I should say, a few times. They would run my favorite In Your House of all time, In Your House 1995 with Brett and the Bulldog. That was in the same building. Also, about a year later, when WWE turned Jim Ross heel and he brought back the fake Razor and fake Diesel, that set of Monday Night Raw tapings took place in Hershey Park Arena as well, along with the Intercontinental title tournament in 1996, where we saw Mark Mero win the title after Ahmed Johnson got injured and had to forfeit the title, and they had a tournament for it. So WWE has ran Hershey Park Arena lots of times in the past, but those are a couple of the shows that stick out in my memory that they ran there. And I always thought it was interesting whenever WWE was in Hershey. I would always remember it as that Saturday night's main event building. But like I said, this was just several months removed from WrestleMania 3, about a month or so away from Survivor Series, the very first Survivor Series. And Randy Savage and Hulk Hogan both were dealing with a lot of WrestleMania fallout in their respective careers. Randy Savage was going back after that Intercontinental title, and Hulk Hogan was not done with Andre the Giant yet, as they would be battling again at Survivor Series. And then of course, Hulk Hogan would drop the title to him in February on NBC that would lead to the WrestleMania 4 tournament. So a lot was about to happen here with Savage and Hogan, but they kind of got the ball rolling on this episode. Now, normally on Saturday night's main events, it was Vince McMahon and Jesse the Body Ventura doing commentary. Ventura was absent for this one, and Bobby the Brain Heenan filled in. And I did like Bobby and Vince. They had good chemistry, and I'm curious if perhaps maybe the reason Jesse wasn't there is because he was filming one of his movies. It is possible in '87 that he was filming a Predator or a Running Man or something like that, but he wasn't on this show, and Bobby the Brain Heenan filled in for him. Now, Vince McMahon announces to the crowd that out of the 4 matches we have tonight, 3 of them are championship matches. All 3 championships are on the line: IC, World, and Tag Team. And he reminds Bobby Heenan that what all of the champions have in common is that he doesn't manage any of them. And he gets really mad, yells at Vince, and says that he's going to have a surprise for Vince and all of us later on in the show. Now, the first match on the card is an Intercontinental title match, Honky Tonk Man defending against Macho Man Randy Savage. Now, back when I was 10 years old, I didn't understand that you didn't really see title changes on Saturday night's main events. Even though they were very, very fun and they were awesome whenever they came on, you didn't really see title changes. We did see a couple. I know the Brainbusters beat Demolition for the tags in 89. There might be another one in there somewhere. Oh, 92, when Shawn beat Bulldog. But that was like at the end of SNME. Those, first 5 or 6 years, I can't recall any title changes other than that tag title change with the Demolition and Brainbusters. Now, the Hearts and Rockers swapped the titles, but they never aired it, so that didn't count. But really, generally, overall, you didn't really see title changes on Saturday night's main event. But 10-year-old Greg didn't know that. So in my mind, I was about to watch Randy Savage win the Intercontinental title. That was the reason I wanted to stay up late, is because I knew he was going to beat the Honky Tonk Man. Why do you ask? Because Honky Tonk Man sucks. Just look at him. He's dressed like fucking Elvis. Macho Man is a badass. He's already held that IC title for over a year. He's winning it back tonight. Or so I thought. This was back in the day when they used to have the rule that the champion would come out last, but they started to realize that sometimes it's better when the babyface comes out last. So they started making little excuses here and there whenever a champion would come out first. Oh, they requested to do it or whatever. It was just their way of explaining away why they want to have the Macho Man come out second. Now, we got pre-match interviews before all of these matches as well. Honky Tonk Man is interviewed first, and he mentions that he wants to go out there first so he can appease his audience because he's the greatest Intercontinental Champion of all time and whatever, right? So Honky heads out to the ring first. He's doing his thing in the ring, and then we go backstage to a Macho Man Randy Savage interview with Elizabeth and with Mean Gene. And this is one of my favorite Macho Man interviews of all time. I used to have it memorized as a kid, when he's like, "Danger zone, we are in the danger zone." And he's got this Jimmy Hart LJN figure and he's biting it. He's like, 30 days and 30 nights. All I've had for nourishment is biting this mouth of the South doll. And he's just going nuts. He calls Honky Tonk Man a dime store imitation of Elvis. And he says he doesn't know the difference between a guitar string and a G string. And Gene pops and starts laughing. And Savage is like, "Oh no, yeah, that's not funny. Everybody is super serious in the danger zone. So we cannot make jokes in the danger zone." Make sure you make a note of that. If you ever find yourself in the danger zone, do not laugh. Macho Man does not approve. And another thing that I loved around this time, it made me so happy as a fan, is that back in the day when Savage was a heel, he used to treat Elizabeth like shit. And when they were doing an interview and it was time to go to the ring, he would go, "Elizabeth, down that aisle." And he would just scream at her. And now he was nicer. Now that he is a babyface, he was being a lot nicer to Elizabeth, and I think WWE was trying to repair the bad reputation that Savage had with fans, those of us who remembered him treating her badly. So this was all kind of the beginning of it too, what we would see transpire in this match here, and then also at WrestleMania 4 with Savage giving her the ultimate endorsement, putting her up on his shoulders and whatnot. Actually, he did that in another Honky Tonk Man match in February. It was when he first kind of gave Elizabeth her flowers, so to speak, and he was starting to be nicer to her. And even when it was time to go to the ring, he's like, "Elizabeth, together we're walking down that aisle, let's go." Yeah, he just wasn't as bossy, wasn't as mean, wasn't as vulgar and violent, and it was kind of nice to see him treat Elizabeth a little bit better. I really liked that as a fan, even at 10 years old. So Macho Man and Elizabeth make their way to the ring. Elizabeth, of course, looks great. She's wearing that white dress, and Savage has my all-time favorite Macho Man robe on. He's got that silver and black one that looks so fucking good. One of my favorites of all time. He looks so good in that thing. So he's out there now, and the match gets underway. So Honky Tonk Man takes control after Savage was working him over early pretty good, but Jimmy Hart, of course, starts to harass Miss Elizabeth on the outside of the ring, and Savage keeps having to go out and deal with with that. So he comes out to run off Jimmy Hart, but gets blasted from behind by Honky Tonk Man, who then takes control in the ring. Honky works over Savage a bit and he's got him down, but then, just like Jimmy Hart, he also turns his attention to Elizabeth. Now, Bobby Heenan on commentary during this whole match is playing up that Elizabeth wants Honky Tonk Man. She's winking at him. Even in Honky Tonk Man's interview, he said that she likes the way the Honky Tonk Man walks. So Bobby on commentary the whole time is trying to convince the audience at home that Elizabeth wants Honky Tonk Man and whatnot. But even as a 10-year-old kid, I knew better. I knew she wasn't in to that fucking weirdo. So Randy Savage winds up taking back control on Honky Tonk Man after he can't help himself going out and messing with Elizabeth. He comes out and takes control of him, gets him back in the ring, starts whipping his ass, and he gets him down and has him in pinning predicaments several times. And every time he goes to pin Honky, Jimmy Hart comes in the ring and interferes. This happens like 3 times. He breaks up three counts or several 3 counts on Honky Tonk Man. And finally, on the last one, Savage is able just to reach for him, grabs Jimmy Hart by like the hair and jacket, pulls him in the ring. Jimmy's kicking and screaming, and Savage just points at him and punches him right in the face. Jimmy goes through the ropes to the outside. He is knocked out cold. And that's when the Hart Foundation arrive. As Savage is working over Honky, the Hart Foundation show up down the aisle. They come to attend to Jimmy Hart. Honky Tonk Man then gets out of the ring, and the 3 of them pick up Jimmy Hart and they get him to the back, and we go to commercial. When we come back, the Honky Tonk Man is returning with the Hart Foundation, but not Jimmy Hart. So the Harts are now going to be in Honky Tonk Man's corner instead. So that punch to Jimmy Hart was actually not a good idea by Randy Savage, because now the Hart Foundation are out there. But Randy Savage doesn't let that bother him. He continues the match with Honky Tonk Man, but Honky is able to turn the tables on him and throws him outside of the ring and then distracts the referee while Jim Neidhart and Bret Hart beat the shit out of Macho Man Randy Savage on the outside of the ring. They throw him back in the ring, but he is able to kick out and doesn't get pinned. I think he counters. That's what it was. He counters a shake, rattle, and roll. So Honky's got him in shake, rattle, and roll position. Savage gives him a backdrop to counter out of it, then hits him with a body slam and goes up to the top rope and hits his patented Savage elbow on the Honky Tonk Man. And I'm like, this is it. And we get a 1 and we get a 2 and we get Bret, my number 1, screwing my number 2. That's not good for Greg. Bret Hart comes in, hits Savage from behind. Referee calls for the bell. It's a disqualification. Bret Hart costs Randy Savage the Intercontinental title, and the Hart Foundation then proceed to start beating up Savage. They're kicking his ass. Then Honky Tonk Man joins in. So it's a 3-on-1 ass kicking here. Honky goes then to the outside of the ring to fetch his guitar. And this whole sequence here is so memorable to me as a kid. Just watching this live, watching it with my dad, going back and watching this show 150 fucking times and wearing out the VHS tape onion skin thin. You know, it was just one of these matches that I would always go back and watch because of how significant it was. So Honky has his guitar. The Harts are holding Savage, 1 on each side, and he's about to blast Savage with the guitar. He takes like 5 minutes trying to measure him and set it up. And then finally, when he's about to nail Savage with the guitar, Elizabeth slides into frame and she gets in the way of the guitar, and Honky stops and almost hits her. And I remember as a kid being blown away by this. And he's telling her to get out of the way. She won't get out of the way. She refuses to move. And Honky Tonk Man just keeps warning her she won't leave, and then Honky grabs her and throws her to the ground. Even by today's standard, that's kind of crazy, you know? Maybe not Attitude Era, that's totally normal stuff. But back in 1987, to see Honky Tonk Man shove Elizabeth down so violently that she breaks the strap on her dress. I mean, Elizabeth doesn't get credit for the couple of bumps in her life that she has taken. In 89, on the main event, when the Mega Powers broke up about a year or so later, year and a half later, she took a huge bump. When Savage got thrown on the outside of the ring, he landed on her. And here, Honky Tonk Man throws her down, literally head over heels. You could see her feet flying up over top of her. She breaks the strap off on her dress. And I remember even my dad kind of freaking out, like, holy fucking shit, he just threw her on the ground. So she cowers away. She gets out of the ring and she runs away. And she's gone now. Now nobody is there to save Savage. So Honky rears back and just bam, and he blasts Savage right over the head, leaving a huge hole in the guitar. And then Honky and the Hearts proceed to put the boots to Savage. He's getting his ass kicked. The crowd starts going nuts. Camera cuts to the aisleway to see Elizabeth dragging Hogan down the aisle. And he's looking around, what? And then he looks in the ring and his eyes get all big. I remember my dad popping. He just laughed so hard the way Hogan's like looking around like, what? Okay, and then he runs in the ring, he darts in the ring, and him and Randy Savage dispose of the Honky Tonk Man and the Hart Foundation. They fight everybody off, big brawl in the ring, and once all of the heels are disposed of, the two baby faces hit back to back, and they pull back their fists, and they're ready to go to blows. And as a kid, you have to understand, as a kid, these guys were enemies. To me, I looked at them as enemies. It was still hard for me to get used to Randy Savage as a good guy, you know? And so to see Hogan and Savage, they had some brutal wars, man. I saw a lot of them from videotapes and also from magazines. And I remember some of the wars that Savage and Hogan had. A lot of those matches were mostly on videotape. I can't remember if any of them aired on television. There might be a TV match that exists somewhere between the two, but most of them were taped for home video or whatever. And they had some really crazy wars. A couple of them got pretty violent and bloody. And in one of those matches, Savage was holding up the title and everything. It's crazy. So you can find a bunch of their matches from back in the day. And they had kind of a brutal issue or a pretty personal issue at one time. Not a full-fledged feud that really made it to TV, but they had a lot of matches with each other, and they have had their differences in the past. So to see them now face to face, about to come to blows, Elizabeth doesn't want to see it. She's shaking her head no, and Savage just stops and he extends a hand. And you always know when Vince McMahon is so hell-bent on telling the stories the way he wants to, because he had these lines all planned out. The meeting of the madness and the mania. Yes. And then these guys shake hands and you see Savage. I just remember the visual of Savage shaking Hogan's hand and kind of nodding like, holy shit, I can't believe this is happening to me. You know, the big man endorsed me, which is what he would say later in his promo. And that visual as a kid, to watch Savage and Hogan lock up with the handshake and everything, was just so awesome to see. I was fucking thrilled. Even though Randy Savage didn't win the Intercontinental title, that moment of Hogan and Savage coming together for the first time was a really, really big deal to me. And I've talked about the Mega Powers storyline from WrestleMania 4 to WrestleMania 5 and how important that feud was to me being a fan. I've already talked about that endlessly in the past for years on this channel. And this is really where it all got started. In October of '87, when Savage and Hogan came together for the first time, it was wild for a 10-year-old kid to watch. And to see Hogan raising the hand of Savage and Elizabeth, standing there with both of them, was such a joy to see. And the madness coming together to meet the mania was pretty wild. And that was a phenomenal first match and segment, and it's one that I think I'm always going to remember, just because it's the first time that Hogan and Savage really, you know, aligned for the first time, and that was the birth of all of that. That's where all of this started. And it's crazy. I remember even as a fan thinking how crazy it was that we didn't really see Hogan and Savage interact again until close to WrestleMania 4. Savage and Hogan wouldn't have anything to do with each other for the rest of the year. They were on separate Survivor Series teams. And then on the main event in February, when Hogan dropped the title, Savage also got his title shot against Honky Tonk Man. And the story goes that Honky didn't want to do the job. And then Savage wound up winning the title in the tournament final at WrestleMania 4 when Hogan helped him win. And they were sharing the ring together and in the WrestleMania 4 main event. And that's when they set in motion the storyline that would put the two of them back together as adversaries at WrestleMania 5. But you'd have to go all the way back to October of the previous year to see these two guys align for the first time. And then they kind of took a break for a while. But Bret Hart would actually get a match against Randy Savage, I believe, on the next Saturday night's main event, which is actually right here. I should have showed you guys this earlier. I have the Saturday night's main event greatest hits videotape. It's this one. And of course, that image from this show that we're talking about with Savage, Hogan, Elizabeth is right there. And also on the back of this, it does show you a photo of right there of the Bret Hart and Randy Savage match that I believe was on the next Saturday night's main event, and it's one of only one or two matches between Bret Hart and Randy Savage that exist. So because Bret was the one that kind of broke up the 3 count, him and Savage had a classic on the next Saturday night's main event, which was a really, really good show. Anyway, this is where Hogan and Savage came together for the first time, and it was amazing. Now, Hulk Hogan also had a championship match on this show. That's right. He was up next defending his WWE championship against the father of Roman Reigns, the Wild Samoan Sika. He was taking on Hulk Hogan for the championship, title on the line, and that match was next. Now, what's cool about this match is that as a kid, I remember Hulk Hogan coming back to the WWE after leaving the AWA. When he showed back up, he came to help Bob Backlund out against the Wild Samoans, which Sika was a part of. So now Sika has come back into the company. Around this time, he was teaming with Kamala a little bit, and Kimchi was his manager along with Mr. Fuji. And I really liked Sika back in these days, seeing him in the ring in the late 80s and stuff. It was a lot of fun. So we get a Sika interview first, and this interview goes down easily as my favorite Mr. Fuji interview or promo of all time. We go backstage. Mean Gene is there with Sika and Mr. Fuji, and Fuji, he was just on one that night. I don't know what he was smoking or what. And he's talking about Sika, his wild Samoan, and how he's a savage, and he's been training him in his dungeon, and he's been feeding him raw crab and raw fish, and he loves chicken. And they cut to a video of Sika just biting this fucking chicken and biting its head. And Mr. Fuji is like, he bites the head and the brains will be dripping out slowly, slowly, and the eyes will fall out, and I love it. It's so great. And you got to wonder what the hell's going on with Fuji. But even as a kid, I remember Fuji as being a very dangerous man in the ring. So now that he was a manager, and the way he was talking like that about brains dripping out and eyes falling out and all of that shit, it was hilarious. There was another Saturday night's main event, maybe a few months later, or maybe it was the next one, where I think it's Mr. Fuji again or something, and they got like this big giant sandwich with mustard, and they're putting it all over it, and Sika's like eating the mustard. They were always doing crazy shit with Sika back then, but watching Fuji cut that promo and be like, he bite the neck and the head and the brains are dripping out. It's hilarious. Fucking hilarious. So Sika now heads to the ring. We get a Hulk Hogan interview now, and Mean Gene asks him how he is feeling, because one of the things Mr. Fuji mentioned is that Hogan is tired. He's very happy with what he just saw with Hogan going in to help out Randy Savage, because he now feels like Hogan has spent all of his energy and Sika is going to be the world champion. He goes, Hogan, you are tired. And so Mean Gene asks Hogan, how tired are you? He's like, I'm fine. I'm not worried about Sika. He talks about his mania meeting Macho's Madness earlier on, and he's on cloud 9, and he's not really worried about the Wild Samoan Sika, and he's not worried about Mr. Fuji either, because all of his Hulkamaniacs are surrounding this jungle zone. So another one of those great Hogan promos from the 80s. He's not too worried about Sika because his Hulkamaniacs are going to back him up. He makes his way to the ring, and we get the match now, and it's kind of cool to see, Sika and Hogan get it on like this. Sika was doing the claw thing on the back, and he did have some offense on Hogan. He was hitting him with the headbutts and whatnot. We even had a commercial break here when Sika had Hogan down. But in the end, nobody was really going to expect Sika to win the WWE title on Saturday night's main event. That wasn't going to happen, but it was still a fun little match there between Hogan and Sika. We got the Hulk up, of course, and we got the 3 punches and the boot and the leg drop. He puts Sika down, and he beats up Kimchi after the match for good measure. So even though Hogan did see some in-ring action earlier on in the Savage match, it was not enough to wind him and put him at any kind of disadvantage against Sika, and Hogan retains his title. Then after that, we got the only non-title match of the evening with King Kong Bundy taking on Mr. Wonderful Paul Orndorff. Now, this was right after Paul Orndorff had fired Bobby Heenan again. So Orndorff was a heel in the mid-'80s. Then he turned on Hogan and joined the Bobby Heenan family. Now he's babyface again, and he wound up firing Bobby Heenan 2 different occasions in his career, and now he's aligned himself with Oliver Humperdinck, who they just brought in to be the manager for Bam Bam Bigelow as well. So we didn't really have, other than Elizabeth, any babyface managers in the company around that time. And I remember they did the same thing with Bam Bam that they did with Randy Savage. They basically just rehashed the angle. When Randy Savage came into the WWE, all of the managers were pining for his services. And then he shocked everybody and swerved us by announcing Miss Elizabeth as his manager, disappointing the likes of Mr. Fuji and Bobby Heenan and Luscious Johnny and probably Jimmy Hart. And then they did the same thing a couple of years later with Bam Bam Bigelow. It was the battle for Bam Bam with Bobby and Slick and Fuji and Jimmy and all those guys battling for the services of Bam Bam Bigelow. And then he swerved everybody by coming in as a babyface, not a heel, and announcing Oliver Humperdinck as his new manager. And Oliver Humperdinck would also be backing up Paul Orndorff. So we get the dual interviews here again, as always, before these matches. Paul Orndorff was interviewed first, and he talked about how he has fired Bobby Heenan twice and how Bobby Heenan would sell his own mother's soul if he could make a buck, and that's why he's with Oliver Humperdinck now. And so he makes his way to the ring. Then we get a King Kong Bundy interview, and Bobby Heenan is electing to stay behind the announce booth for this match, so he's not going to be accompanying King Kong Bundy to the ring. Now, this is the second time in just a few months that Bobby Heenan did this, because he didn't come to the ring during his WrestleMania 3 match against Hillbilly Jim and the Little Guys either. He stayed in the announce booth for that. So Bundy always got the shit end of the stick here, it seemed like, with Bobby Heenan. And this was pretty much close to the end of King Kong Bundy. He would only be in the company for about 2 or 3 more months, and he'd be gone. He'd be gone in really early '88 when he lost a couple of, he had a couple of Saturday Night's main event matches with Hulk Hogan. And the last one, like at the very beginning, first of the year in 1988, he lost. And I don't remember seeing Bundy ever again until he came back in 1994. So we were near the end here for Bundy. And of course, he is going against a former Bobby Heenan family member, and Bundy was part of Orndorff's heel turn on Hulk Hogan. It was Hogan and Orndorff supposed to take on Bundy and Stud, and that was when Paul Orndorff clotheslined Hulk Hogan and hit him with a pile driver. I watched that happen as it aired as a kid, and it pissed me off. So it was really hard for me to trust Paul Orndorff, but I did like him as a babyface when he was with Oliver Humperdinck, even though he didn't hang around in the company very long either after this point. Pretty much Bundy and Orndorff were gone in just a matter of months here after. So Bobby Heenan, like I said, elects to stay behind the announce booth with Vince McMahon and call this match. So as the match is going on, Paul Orndorff starts working over Bundy. Paul Orndorff starts taking firm control of Bundy. He's got Bundy down. Bobby Heenan is starting to panic a little bit, and even at one point he thinks the match is over. He jumps up and he's all scared, and then he runs away. He decides to run away, just like Elizabeth ran away earlier on. He's not gone for very long, though, because just a couple of minutes later, we get the 8th wonder of the world, Andre the Giant, coming down to ringside. Bobby said that he had a surprise for everyone tonight, and I guess this is what it was. I think Andre had to get some more surgery, so I think maybe he was recovering from that. That's why he was out for so long before they put Hogan and Andre back in the ring together the next month at Survivor Series. So Andre's out there to back up Bundy. He's now in King Kong Bundy's corner, and he would play a huge role in the finish as Paul Orndorff gets whipped in to the buckle. He hits the turnbuckle, and that's the corner that Andre's in. And as he starts to stumble forward a little bit, Andre reaches his hand out, grabs a hold of Orndorff's trunks, and pulls him back to the turnbuckle so Bundy can come in and hit him with the avalanche. And it was a pretty cool spot. I always liked it as a kid. Orndorff gets nailed with the avalanche. Bundy pins him for the 3 count, and Andre helps King Kong Bundy beat Mr. Wonderful Paul Orndorff. That was a pretty fun match and a really fun Heenan family memory there between those two guys. And that would leave us with our final match of the night, tag team championships on the line. Champions Heart Foundation defending against the Young Stallions. Now, the Young Stallions got this match, I believe, by beating the Heart Foundation in a non-title match on TV. So that's what gave them the title shot here. And the Hart Foundation had to go into this match without Jimmy Hart because he was taken out in the opener of Savage and Honky. So we get the backstage interview with Mean Gene and the Hart Foundation. The only wrestlers on the show that didn't get a pre-match interview were the Young Stallions, which was pretty funny. And the Hart Foundation are very upset about Jimmy Hart. They're very sad that he can't be out there and they have to go out there without him during a title match. And Jimmy Hart, even though he will be missed, the Harts don't seem to be sweating the Young Stallions too much. Jim Neidhart said they're so young, they're so pretty, they're so innocent or something like that. And then Mean Gene gets mad. And Mean Gene used to have this thing with the Hart Foundation when they were heels where he would get really mad at them. Every time there was some interview for TV, Gene would always storm off mad. He would always say, "You guys are a menace to the sport that I love." And he would run away pissed. And he did this a lot during the heel days of the Hart Foundation. He did it again here too. Ran off mad. That was pretty cool. And now it's the Hart Foundation versus the Young Stallions for the championships. Now the Young Stallions were coming to the ring to the song Crank It Up, which Jimmy Hart recorded. And the story on TV was they stole the song from him and they were using it as their own. And that would happen again to Jimmy Hart with the Strike Force. They would rehash this angle with the Strike Force when they would start using Girls in Cars, much to the chagrin of Jimmy Hart. So the Stallions were kind of the first to do it here, and they were coming out to Jimmy's music that was on the Pile Driver album. The Harts here weren't going to lose to the Stallions, I didn't think. You know, Paul Roma and Jim Powers, they were an interesting tag team. I mean, they were two, kind of body guys, but I always liked Strike Force much better. I thought they were better wrestlers overall than the Young Stallions. Jim Powers was always mostly a jobber. So was Paul Roma, although he was a part of Power and Glory. He did wrestle a little bit as a singles wrestler in WWE, and he had a little bit more success in WCW, even finding his way into the Four Horsemen. But back in these days in '87, he was still an underneath kind of like jobber type of talent, which is kind of weird when you think about it because they were a great looking tag team. But in the end here, the Harts were able to retain the titles after the Young Stallions hit their finisher on the Hart Foundation. Now, their finisher wasn't anything special, but it did look cool. It was basically just a double team effort, an Irish whip on one guy. Paul Roma or Jim Powers would drop down, and then Roma would hit a power slam. So it was just basically a power slam off of an Irish whip, and they hit their finisher on Brett. 1-2. Neidhart comes in hard on Paul Roma and breaks up the 3 count, and he hit Paul Roma really, really hard. So as soon as he nailed Paul Roma, Jim Powers gets all bent out of shape. Referee's dealing with him. Hart Foundation lifts up Paul Roma and hits him with the heart attack just as the referee is spinning back around. 1, 2, 3. And without Jimmy Hart with them, they're the champions of the world, successfully retaining their title. Honky, the Harts, and Hulk Hogan all retained their titles on this night. And it was also noted in the opening match when Hogan, Savage, and the Harts were brawling that all 4 champions were in the ring at the same time. And that was very, very rare to see everybody mixing it up together, to see the Intercontinental Champion, the World Champion, and the Tag Team Champions all fighting each other in 1987. That was a rare sight to see, extremely rare. So as a kid, I always remembered that too. So when you look at these matches, the Savage and Honky one really, really sticks out. And I think after I've gone back and watched this show so many times as a kid, I was able to start, kind of reciting the commentary and the announcers and the interviews and stuff. I've just seen this show so many times, and it's always been one of my favorites. If somebody is just watching this casually, they've never seen the show before, maybe it's not going to look as significant or special, to a casual fan. But for someone like me, this particular show was so important to me as a kid that I'm not really sure where I would have been as a fan had I not seen this or recorded it or watched it with my dad. It's just one of those shows that I'm always going to remember as a big, big part of why I'm a wrestling fan to begin with. And that was pretty much it for the wrestling matches, but we weren't done yet because then we had one more final interview backstage with Mean Gene with Hulk Hogan and Randy Savage coming together, the madness meeting the mania, and they're a little bit worried about locking up right now because if they do and they shake hands, the whole universe could explode. And Hogan starts talking about that he always knew that Hulkamania was the strongest force in this universe, but when he got out there, he realized that there's a whole nother universe out there, the universe of the madness, and now that these two are coming together, they are forming the Ultimate Alliance, and Randy Savage is the first guy to coin them the Mega Powers. The Mega, yeah, the Mega, yeah, the Mega Powers, yeah, Mega Powers, yeah. And they're all just coked up. They're going fucking nuts. This is a famous interview, too, because they just look so roided and rage-filled. It's so great. Just pro wrestling at its best here. And I remember being a kid, not being an adult yet, and kind of wondering, like, what is it about handshakes? I thought that's the way everybody's supposed to shake hands. You're supposed to go, yeah. So I remember doing it to a friend. Let's shake hands. Ooh, yeah. And he's like, what the fuck are you doing? I thought that's the way grown-ups shook hands. I really did. Hogan and Savage really had me convinced that that's the way it was. So that interview was a lot of fun. Hogan and Savage coming together. Mean Gene Okerlund asks Savage about the hit over the head. And he goes, don't you worry about the hit over the head, man. It was great. So great. Great stuff. I invite you to check it out on Peacock. Please do. You won't be disappointed. So after we got the big Mega Powers promo, we had one more final treat, the world premiere of the Pile Driver video. This thing was so great. This was Coco Beware singing the Pile Driver song, and they recorded a video for this that was on the Pile Driver VHS tape, which I happen to have right here. Hulk Hogan on the front of that baby. And this is where Girls and Cars is located, as well as Honky Tonk Man's song and Rock and Roll Hoochie Coo. Rick Derringer is a part of this. Demolition's theme, I think, is on here as well. And they released a video for Coco Beware's Pile Driver song. And Coco Beware, he could sing. He really could. And the video was great because it had Hulk Hogan, Don Morocco, Superstar Billy Graham, Arnold Skoland, Vince McMahon is in this thing. Who else is in it? Jimmy Hart, Honky, Oliver Humperdinck I remember seeing in this. So it's a lot of fun. They're all at a construction site. Go watch the Pile Driver video. It's fun. And they premiered that on the very end of Saturday night's main event. So this episode is a kid between Savage and Honky, the IC title match, then Hogan and Savage coming together, and then we also have Hogan defending the belt. We have the Hart Foundation defending their titles, and as a kid, I watched the match when the Stallions beat them, so I thought there was really a chance they could win. And watching matches like this with the innocence of being 10 years old, with not fully understanding how everything works yet, is the best because I was really, really influenced by this show. It left a huge impression on me as I became a wrestling fan later on in my life, and I still remember this show with so much fondness. Like, I remember the way my living room smelled when I was sitting there late at night with my dad watching it. You know what I mean? So it's all of those memories brought back up. It's a show that I've always wanted to talk about, and we've never really talked about it in detail. I've talked about the first time Savage and Hogan hooked up and stuff before, but I've never really done just a long form review on this specific show. So I'm glad we got to do that here today. Thank you so much for listening to me talk about these memories. I really, really appreciate it. I'm sorry again that I'm not up here tonight to do a classic watch along, but I thought this would be a pretty fun replacement video for that, and I hope you guys enjoyed it. If for any reason you have some memories of the show, or if you have anything to elaborate on or add, or a question you have, please drop it in the comments below. I'd love to know if any of you were old enough to remember this when it happened and what your thoughts were on it at the time, because it was pretty significant to me, and I will never ever forget this specific episode of Saturday night's main event. I want to thank you guys for hanging out with me this afternoon and going way back to 1987 to talk about this one and relive a little bit of my childhood with me. I really appreciate it. I hope you guys have a great rest of your day. We will be back here tomorrow night for a Monday Night Raw review, so make sure you're here for that, and I will be catching you guys real soon. Take care. Peace.